Very good morning, students. Welcome back to the online classes. Today, we are going to start a new chapter called as constructors and destructors. Before getting into this chapter, we'll check it out. What is the weightage of this chapter? In this chapter, we have one 2-mark question and one from the 5 marks question. Totally, we are going to have 7 marks of marks in this chapter. Before getting into it, we'll see that what are the topics we are going to cover in this chapter. We are going to cover the declaration and definition of a constructors, types of constructors like default constructors, parametric constructors, copy constructors, and constructor overloading, and destructors. These are the different topics which are going to cover in this chapter. Overall, this chapter, it's very important chapter where we can gain a 7 marks from this chapter. Let us see briefly into the next slide. Yeah, what is in constructors? A constructor is a special kind of a class member function that is automatically called when an object of a class is initialized. When it has been called automatically when an object of a class is initialized. Constructors are typically used to initialize member variables of the class to appropriate default or user provided values or to do any step up necessary for the class to be used. Normally member function constructors have special rules for how they must be named. Firstly, the constructor must have the same name as the class. Constructor must have the same name as a class. Constructor have no written values. Constructor is automatically called when an object is created. Constructor is automatically called when an object is created. If we do not specify constructor, C++ compiler generates a default constructor for us. If we do not specify a constructor, C++ compiler generates a default constructor for us. A major difference between the constructor versus member functions. Now that we know that what is a constructor, let us discuss how a constructor is different from member function of the class. First, the constructor does not have any written value, but member function has a written value. The first difference is the constructor does not have any written value, but member function has a written type. Second difference, the constructor is automatically called when we create an object of a class. Constructor is automatically called when we create an object of a class. But member function need to be called explicitly used object by a class. Member function need to be called explicitly used object of a class. When the third difference, when do do not create any constructor. When we do not create any constructor in a class, C++ compiler generates a default constructors and insert into a code. The same does not apply onto the member functions. These are the difference between the member function and the constructors. Once again, I'll come again. What is constructors? Constructor is a special member function that is called automatically when an object is created. The main purpose of the constructor is to mainly initialize a member variables of a class. The main purpose of a constructor is to mainly initialize a member variable of the class. This is called as a constructor. Let us see the syntax into the next. Before Seeing the syntax, let us see what is the need of a constructors and the rules for the constructors. The first need is to initialize the objects. To initialize an object. To avoid the garbage values. To avoid the garbage values. Third need is sometimes object have to be initialized before using them. Sometimes object have to be initialized before using them. To initialize an objects, normally we call member function. Normally we used to call a member functions without making a separate call to the member function. We can initialize the objects through the constructors. These are the major needs for the constructor to be constructed in your program. Here we have a general syntax for the constructor. Here we have a class. Class is a keyword. Class is a keyword followed by the class name. And I have started my class with my classes consist of two access specifier, private as well as your public. And I have created my constructor with the name of a same as a class name of a class name. This is how you're going to create a constructor. The class name and the member function name are identical. Let us see in the next slide with an example. Once we see an example, we can have a clear picture how to create a constructors. Here we have an example for the constructors. Let us take this example. I have created a class name called as a test. And I have created a class which consists of three data members, that is M, X, Y. Without the defaultly, it is considered as a private. And I have created a constructor called as a test. Test is a constructor by using the same name of a class, and I have initialized two values for a x as well as a y. I have initialized x is equals to 0 and y is equals to 0. Once an object is created, automatically the constructor start executing. The value of x is equals to 0 and value of y is equals to 0, that is initialized for the two variables. This is how you are going to create a constructors. Here we have very important topic, that is types of constructors. In the types of constructors we have three different types of constructors. First one is default constructor, and also we can call it as zero argument constructor. Second type is parameterized constructors. Third one is copy constructors. These are the different types of constructors. I'll come again. The types of constructors are default constructor, can also call as zero argument constructor. Second one, parameterized constructors. Third one is copy constructors. Let us discuss one by one from the next slide. Now we will see the first type, that is default constructors. A default constructor, if no constructor is defined in a class, then the compiler automatically creates one for the program. This constructor, which is created by the compiler when there is no user defined constructors and which does not take any parameter, is called default constructors. A default constructor is a type of constructors which does not take any argument, It is also called as a zero argument constructors. We'll see the syntax for it. It is where you are going to have the class name, scope resolution operator, and the class name. Here we have going to create a constructors. Here, what is a default constructors, in the sense where we are not going to pass any arguments. For an example, we have a student. Students is a constructor which I created. In a student constructor, I have never passed any argument within a function. These type of constructors, we call that as a default constructors. Let us see what are the features of default constructor. The major features of default constructors is, for every object which we create, the constructor is automatically called. For every object created, this constructor is automatically called. All objects of a class are initialized to the same set of values. What is that? All objects of a class are initialized to the same set of values. If different objects are to be initialized with the different values, it cannot be done by using a default constructors. These are the major features of default constructors. Let us see an example for a default constructors. Here we have an example for initializing a value using a default constructors. I have created a class in this program. Just we are going to pass a values for the two variables. So I have created a class called as an x, and I have two variables, that is data members of a and b, which is initialized into a private. And I have created one constructors, that is default constructors. The constructor which is having a same name of a class as x where we have initialized a default constructors. When you observe that function, I have never passed any parameters into x function. This we call it as a default function, default constructors. In this default constructors, I am passing a value a for the 10 and b to the 20. And now I have created a constructors. And let us go to the main program. Once you go for the main program, I have created a two objects, x object 1 and object 2. Once object 1 is created, automatically the value of a is equals 10 is assigned. Why? Because once an object is created, a default constructor is being accessed. There is no need of using any object to be access the constructors. Once I access object1.display, it is going to access the member function called as a void display cout a. And cout a, once I give it as cout a, it is going to display as a is equals to 10 and b is equals to 20. Here, once you observe in a program, I never called any constructor function. Once an object is created, automatically the constructor is invoked. This type of invocation, we tell that it is a default constructors. I have accessed my display function for the two times. That is object1 dot display and object2 dot display. Once I access it two times, my output is to be printed two times. One is a value is 10 and b value is 20. Once you observe the output of this program, it has been displayed 10 and 20 two times. And here in this program, I have never called any function as x. Once an object is created, the x constructor is executed. This is a simple program for betterment of knowing the what is default constructors. I hope so that today's class students have been clearly understood what is a default constructors. Let us see the other two types of constructors in the next class. Thank you.